Hello, I'm Fiona from the Oxford Reading Hive team, and today I am joined by the amazing author Jo Cotterill, author of Looking at the Stars, the Electrical series, and most recently Jelly.
That's right.
Thank you so much for being here and
Thank you
speaking
for
to us today. We've got quite a lot of questions actually to get through, so I'm going to get straight onto it. We've been doing a sort of an author chain of getting each interviewee to ask the other a question.
Yes.
And I know you've answered this on Twitter, but for those who didn't see it, Kieran Millwood-Hargrave, who we met last month, wanted to know if you could live in any book world, which would it be and why?
And I will give the same answer today that I gave on Twitter, not to confuse anyone. I would live in the Magic Faraway Tree. That was a childhood favourite. I loved the variety that every time you went up to the top of the tree there was something different, and there was a fairy and a slide down the inside. I mean, what's not to like? Plus, you know, it grows different fruits as you get up the tree. So, yeah, I would that would be it for me. Magic, adventure, but also a kind of secure base. With a slide.
With a slide.
I think all homes should have a slippery slip in them somewhere.
Brilliant. Okay. Okay. So, Looking at the Stars, which we have here, was recently the Oxford Reading Hive Book of the Month, so we've also all been reading it along. I thought we'd ask a few questions about it while we have you here. So, in the story, Yamina and her family live in a country which is suddenly segregated. She finds herself separated from her family, and she's walking to a refugee camp with her sister.
Yes.
That's a brief summary.
Yes.
What was the inspiration behind Yamina's character, and what do you most admire about her?
There's a lot of me in Yamina. She's probably the character who's closest to me that I've created. I think it's partly because she's not very good with authority.
Okay.
She doesn't mind rules as long as they're fair. And if a rule isn't fair, then she will ask questions and want to change things. And that's what I admire about her, actually. And what I sometimes wish I had a bit more of is that courage to just... It's exhausting though, fighting systems. And what I like about her and what I identify with is the ability to continually see things that perhaps other people aren't seeing. And to be able to keep her mind open to ideas and to other people's experiences, but also to be able to dream. You know, she's a big dreamer. So that's what I like.
So I might actually jump a little bit, because Yamina, she's told off for her storytelling. By her mother and by other captains. But it becomes her way of sort of comforting her sisters and contributing to the life of the camp. So everyone needs to have their role, and this sort of becomes hers. Where did the idea of storytelling as a solace come from?
Bedtime.
Okay. Simple.
I always had stories before bedtime when I was young. In fact, when I was very young, my brother and I would share a bath in the evening, and my dad would read to us while we were in the bath. And that would range from Ivor the Engine and Winnie the Pooh up to Aesop's Fables and the Just So stories. So to me, storytelling has always been a shared experience, a kind of comforting, this is where you belong, sort of safe space sort of thing. And I think you see that actually, and I see that when I go on school visits. And I talk to the kids about stories, and I read bits from my books, and they're just in that moment when you're reading to them, and you've got them right there, and there's this feeling in the room that you kind of exist outside reality. You know, and they're on every word with you, and I think that's really magical.
The setting in Looking at the Stars, it's never specified.
No, that's right.
And you've said in the past it's based on a number of different different conflicts. How did you research the novel? How did you decide sort of what went into it to create Yamina's sort of the conflict that she faces?
So I'm not big on research.
Okay.
For lots of authors, the research is like the most fun part in a way. They love sort of looking up things, collecting things, making scrapbooks, and some people do like little card files and stuff, and I'm really not very good about that thing at all. I prefer to start writing and see what happens, and when something occurs to me that I don't already know about, then I go and look it up then.
Okay.
So I do the research as I go along, really. But most of Looking at the Stars just simply came out of my head. Although, having said that, of course, there are many elements of it that I've borrowed from various places around the world. The headscarves for the women, for example, although what I liked about my version of the headscarves is they're not religious. It's simply to denote age of the child. So you can look at a girl and know exactly how old she is by looking at the colour of her headscarf. You can look at a woman and know if she's married or not. And the men and the boys don't have that at all. And I really wanted to put that in because I think it's a really visual way of explaining how girls and women are treated so very differently. They are sort of categorised. And of course I borrowed the Letters of Heritage in the book, which is where each family has to wear a letter that denotes their cultural heritage. I borrowed that, of course, from Stars of David in the Second World War, where you could see instantly from looking at people which ones were the Jews and which ones were not, and that causes divisions instantly. The minute you label people as you are this sort of person and you are this sort of person, then it pits them against each other, and then they start separating. And that, of course, is what humanity does to each other all the time. But in terms of, I mean, practicalities, things like refugee camps, I looked at those online. I looked at lots of photos. I read lots of articles about conditions in those kind of places. And I just imagine, because once you've seen a photograph, it's actually quite easy to say to yourself, right, what would it actually be like to be in that every single day? Not have any hope of leaving, not know where your family is. Actually, it is quite easy to look at that and go, whoa, that's gonna be tough
and sort of impactful.
Yes.
Yeah. How important do you think it is to have strong female lead characters, and is this something you think about when writing your novel?
I think about this a lot. I think about feminism a lot. I think about equality a lot. I also think that it's interesting that even in asking that question, you phrased it in a way that we tend to. Why do we call them strong female characters? Why are they strong? We don't talk about strong male characters.
No, that's true.
Do we? So why can we not just say central female character or female protagonist? Or it sort of requires a girl to suddenly be something just in order to reclaim her place as the most important character in the story. Yes, that is partly why I do write central female characters, because I think those questions are still so relevant, possibly even more than they were 10-15 years ago. Because there are so many girls growing up now who still are not seeing enough of a range of possibilities for futures, and equally, and almost even more important, not enough boys seeing women in range of options in the future, and not being encouraged to treat the girls that they're with as equals to themselves. It's so often that if somebody says to me, "Oh, I've got this 11-year-old boy, what do you think you would recommend?" People automatically recommend boy-central characters, and I have to stop myself doing it as well. But I think it's something that really does need thinking about, and it is very, very important. And I probably overthink it. Okay. It would be nice, as people say, it would be nice not to have to think about it at all. But for the time being, we do have to.
Do you have a character that you'd like to return to? Do they have more to say, or is there a character that maybe they'd like to give more prominence to in every book?
Yeah, interestingly, when I finished writing Looking at the Stars, I really wanted to write a sequel. Because the end of the book is it's an ending, but it's not the end of Yamina's story, because she still hasn't found her brother. He is sorry, spoilers. There's still a family member missing, and she sets out to find him at the end of the book. And I would like to have been able to carry that on, but there wasn't the publishing demand for it at the time. And I had an idea for something else, and you know, as time goes by, and you go, oh, this is an idea, and this is a shiny idea, you know, and it's so I haven't written that, and it would be, I think it would be nice maybe at some point in the future to return to Yamina and write the next chapter of her story. And actually, Electra Girl, which I know we're coming on to, I only did 3 books in that series as well. I could have written those. So they're so much fun to work on.
Okay, so we are going to talk about that and the collaboration process a little bit. I take was the collaborating part of the fun?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh, it's amazing.
How did that come about?
So back in 2013 or something, I was running a blog called Girls Heart Books, which brought together lots of authors and illustrators who write for children, and we all took it in turns to blog. And Kathy Brett, the illustrator, was one of the, and she's an author, she was one of the people blogging on the site, which I ran. And so that's how I came into contact with her, and she used to put up little pictures of things she'd been working on, and I would go, oh, that's really clever. And then I had this idea for Electra Girl. It wasn't called that back then. But I wrote to Kathy, I said, listen, how would you feel about maybe working with me on some kind of superhero comic strip type mashup with a normal novel type thing? And she said, well, I've never done comic strip before. Okay. And I said, well, now's your chance. And she, thankfully for me, said, yes, let's do it. So that's very much in a nutshell how that collaboration happened. Right early on, before we approached any publishers, before we talked to anybody about it, I went, oh, I've got this idea. If you want to, and I've never worked that way on any other book. So that was really nice, actually, having a partner right from the start.
Yes, yeah. And would you draft out what you thought the story was, and because the illustrations sort of come in when she becomes Electra Girl, and it's the sort of the superhero. So.
Yes, so the way it worked, the way we thought it was going to work to start with, we actually thought, I thought we were going to be a bit more collaborative in shaping the story. And I would have some ideas and I would bounce them over to Kathy, and she would write back and say, yeah, I think they sound great. And I'd be like, oh, go for it. Okay. And I think to start with, that was because we didn't know each other very well. There was that kind of hesitancy. She didn't want to kind of say, well, that idea is rubbish, I don't think we should do that. You know, so she didn't necessarily feel that she could, you know, criticise the words, and I didn't necessarily feel I could criticise the pictures. So it was, for a while, it was one of the not quite sure who's in charge of what. But actually, in the end, the way it worked out was slightly more traditionally, in a way. I wrote the whole manuscript first, and the comic strip sections I would write in bold, and I would write very basic instructions. So. It would say in italics, comic strip. Yeah. And then it would say, scene 1, Holly turns to run, caption this, speech bubble that. And then I would plot it out like that. Okay. And I would have some vague idea. Yeah. But of course, as a non-artist, it's quite difficult to visualise sometimes what you want. Because you can't actually write somebody starts running away from, because that's not a thing you can represent in a picture. You can't draw somebody starting to run away. Either they're running away, or they're not. You know, there isn't a sort of. So Kathy and I both looked at lots of graphic novels and sort of looked at the transitions between frames and panels and how it could all work, layouts on pages. And so what we would do is I would send the manuscript in to my editor here at OUP, and she would read it through, and I would probably do a rewrite before it got anywhere near anything. Okay. To be honest, this one, I know you're going to ask about rewrites as well. This one was rewritten from scratch. Okay. I chucked out the entire first draft and did it again, and I'll explain why a bit later maybe. So before Kathy was even given the comic strips, the manuscript had to be in a decent enough shape. And then she would do roughs. And then we would have these epic meetings here where we would all sit around. There were 2 editors and a designer and Kathy and me, and we would all sit around this table with lots of paper paper, and we would talk through Kathy's drafts, and we would work out whether the captions need to be changed or whether people's faces looked weird or all of that kind of thing. And then she would go and do more, and we would come back and do more, and it was hugely collaborative, and I got to have a big say on the front cover, which normally as an author, I mean in terms of layout as well, it was hugely, I got to help say, oh, and I think we should have the page turn here instead of there, and that was so much fun, because authors normally, you hand in the manuscript and then the illustrator does their thing, and then the publisher goes ta-da, and you sort of go yay, but you're not actually involved in the development of it. So it was fantastic.
So I'd sort of been around it. It was the two of you, but it sounds like it was a team.
It was very much a team effort. Yeah, no,
okay.
the editors here at AUP and Holly, the designer, was just brilliant and so up for it. When they took the book to start with, when we sent it in and they said, yes, we'd like to have a go at this, we'll publish this book. And they did say to me, we don't really know how to do this, but we're excited by the idea and we want to have a go. So, and it was very much a journey for all of us.
I'm going to ask about editing, because when we spoke to Kieran, I think she slightly astounded all of us by saying that her first book had 10 drafts in total, one that included a complete rewrite from a different sort of character point of view. Have you ever had no, okay, no similar experience?
But to me, the more I work on a book, the more drafts I have to do, the less I like the book.
Okay.
And some people say to me, especially when I go and meet kids, they say, which is your worst book?
Right.
Kids are so funny like that. Of all the books you've written, which one's the worst? Right. Because obviously they're then going to go, I'm not buying that one. But I find that I dislike reworking. Some authors love the editing, the tinkering, pulling this bit out. I can't. It makes me want to stick forks in my eyes. I don't mind the first. Normally what happens is I send in my manuscript. The first draft is usually fairly polished, and structurally is normally there. But there will be scenes that go on too long. There might be a subplot that doesn't go anywhere. There's a minor character that is really pointless, and they go, well, should we lose them or beef them up or whatever. So normally the rewrite that I do for draft 2 is quite a big one. That would be pulling it apart, putting it back together again, and then from then normally we would go to much smaller edits. That I would do one massive rewrite, and then smaller things, and then it would go off to copy edit. So most of my books are 3 drafts. But I have done, I mean this one actually was so this was about 28,000 words, I think, or something, 30-ish. And when I sent it in to Kathy and Jill here, they said, it's great, it's really funny. Listen, we've had some ideas about you could put this in, and we could do this, and we could do this. And I was like, damn. Because their ideas were really good. Right. But incorporating them actually meant that I had to dump the entire plot line. I mean, I knew roughly what needed to happen, but it had to happen in a completely different way to how I'd written it. So that was all chucked out, and I started literally from the first sentence again. Which I really didn't enjoy so much as well. But I was on a lot of pressure for deadlines for that one, so just had to get on and do it. And the book that I've had to rewrite the most is A Library of Lemons, which I searched on my computer this morning, and it went to 7 drafts.
Right, okay.
And that I hated. And there was a question here about how do you know when the book's
how do you know when it's done?
Finished? How do you know it's finished? When the editor tells me.
Okay.
By that point, I have no idea. Literally no idea. I mean, I can look at it and go, well, I think it is all right, but I don't know if it works anymore. It's like taking a complicated watch apart and reorganising all the cogs into a different place. and you wind it back up and it starts ticking again, and you go, well, it seems to be fine. Everything's in a different order in a different place, but the clock still basically works.
Yeah.
You go, well, is it finished? I don't know, probably it works. So, you know,
Yeah.
the editor goes, yes, I think that's great.
Yeah.
So that's the point at which I go,
Fine. Okay. But it's giving yourself a bit of space from it and a fresh perspective.
Yeah,
and
which is why
time
editors
apart
are
from it.
so massively important.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So with the launch of the 500 words competition, we've been thinking a lot recently about inspiration, where trying to give sort of students advice and trying to find out where authors get their inspiration from.
Yeah.
So what interested and inspired you as a child, and creatively what inspires you now?
As a child, I lived very much in fantasy worlds.
Okay.
I still really, you know, lament the fact that I never managed to have a pet unicorn. You know, I think I was inspired by magical ideas, by music. I did a lot of music, a lot of drama and dance when I was young, very creative. Lots of drawing, making things, some writing, but just sort of generally creative and arty. And in fact, that I have found that has come back a bit now. I've just taken up painting in the last year, acrylic painting, which is, it's brilliant. I'm really enjoying it. You know, it doesn't really matter what the end result is. I just like, look at all these colours. And I think we lose that ability to play when we're grown-ups, because when you're grown up, the idea of making something is all about the end product, you know, and so it's all about, yes, what's it meant to be?
Yeah.
And actually that kind of takes some of the fun out of it. So, music again, I've started playing in a band, so that's fun. But yeah, anything that gives me that kind of tingle, that kind of buzz, which I can get from lots of places actually. But in terms of writing a story, and particularly for a 500-word story, I think 500-word stories are really hard. And I think the danger with a lot of people is that they try to cram an entire novel into 500 words. You know, it's like, you know, Sid woke up in the morning and a spaceship landed on his lawn and they went to the planet Zorax, and while they were there they had to save this magic dragon who had run out of fire, so they took the dragon to the, and then along the way, you know, it's just like too much happening in a small space of time. I could write 500 words about somebody walking up to a front door and make it really gripping. You know, because there would be all this inner thought about what this person was going to find behind the front door, what kind of atmosphere was around. You know, is somebody following them? You know, their hands are trembling as they're looking for the key. You know, I could make that. Easily write 500 words about that. And I think sometimes people just try and cram too much in. And I think people also think that in order to make writing powerful and gripping, that there has to be lots of action. I don't think that's necessarily the case. All you have to be able to do is to draw your reader in. If you think about scenes in television and film where really not much is happening, but you're like, you can't stop watching because you're waiting, you know. And I think if you can put that into a story, that's really exciting.
That covers that. So top 3 tips then.
Okay. So reading, obviously. Reading is always going to be number 1, because the more you surround yourself with stories and words, the more you're going to absorb along the way. And I think that sort of branching out as much as possible, but also allowing yourself those comfort rereads. I'm a big believer in rereading, because even a book that you've really enjoyed on the first time, if you read it the second time, you're going to find different things in it. It's like when my kids wanted to watch Frozen 43 times, you know, and it's because each time they were getting something slightly different from it. And I think books should be treated in the same way. You know, we're very keen to say to children, oh, you've read that, right, well, try this one next. You know, and that's good, but I also think we should allow people to just sort of sit with what they've read, and maybe read down books as well. You know, when I was growing up, I was quite academic, quite high achieving, but what I loved to do to relax was read Famous Five. You know, even when I was 13, 14. I mean, the books that were technically too young for me, but they were very, very much comforting, and they're still words, and they are still plots, and they are still story arcs, and you've still got characters with all their emotions and what they want, and there's a dog, so you know you can't go wrong there. Nope. So read everything. That's what I would. That's my tip number one. Number two, always surprises people because I say to kids, especially when they ask, that writing is a bit like learning a musical instrument. You wouldn't expect to pick up a violin and instantly be able to play Mozart concerto. You just wouldn't. Even though you might have heard lots of music on the radio or from your friends or on your iPods or whatever. You know, I know music, yeah. But actually, playing a violin is a completely different type of skill. So just because we can all speak English and put sentences together doesn't mean you can write a good story. So it's all about practice, and I reckon that before I had my first book published, I must have written hundreds of thousands of words, many of them terrible, really awful. But you have to write the rubbish stuff before you're going to get better, and the more you do it, the better you're going to get, and the better idea about what you as an author want to say, and how your voice works, and how strong you feel in your expressions. So reading is number one. Writing, I feel really easy.
Is it going to be arithmetic next?
Maths. No, it isn't. No, actually, my third tip is you don't need to show off in writing. Lots of schools, and the way literacy is taught nowadays, they teach you to use really complex language, to drop the word said and replace it with all these other words, as you know, could make your sentences longer and expand. So instead of the tiger padded through the forest, you might have the silky orange stripy tiger padded silently through. You don't actually have to do that. Sometimes I judge short story competitions from children, and some of them, they have created incredibly beautiful sentences that mean nothing at all. You know, and you read it and you go, wow, it sounds really impressive, but what does it actually mean? And I think there's the danger that you can get hold of language and go, yeah, I'm going to create this wedding cake with all this fancy stuff, and forget that it tastes like cardboard. So it's got to be about getting your story across. I did a creative writing workshop once with year 8s, and they had to write a descriptive piece based on images, photographs that I'd given them. And some of them wrote very flowery, complicated things. And one of them wrote quite a short piece, and in the middle of it was one line that went, "He hurt me that day." And the whole room just went, and that's made up of monosyllabic words. Every single one of those words could be read by a 4-year-old, probably 5-year-old starting out to read. It's just,
it's what he had.
That's how you get your message across, through power of language. So my third tip is getting your message across doesn't mean complicated words.
Or lots of them.
Or lots of them. Just make it clear what you're trying to say.
So, to finish, to continue our author chain, we are interviewing Sally Nichols next month. And so I was wondering, what question would you like to ask Sally?
Okay, Sally. Sally is one of my author friends here in Oxford, so I have a vested interest in Sally's books, and I have thought about this. Sally, lots of your novels involve real historical events or characters from history, real people from history. I would like to know, what event or person from history have you not yet written about that you would really like to?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's been absolutely delightful talking to you. And if you want to find out any more about any of these books, please talk to us. You can follow us on Twitter at Oxford Ed English. And Jo, you are...
I have a website at jocotterill.com, and I am on Twitter at Jo Cotterill Book. Yes.
Okay.
It's really long.
Sure you'll find it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.